All right, we got a full house for this one. I did a lousy job of scheduling this thing. I've got myself producing and helping host a couple of shows while Newcastle's on TV. I don't know what I was thinking. I'm screwing this up a little bit.
Are you a Newcastle fan?
Yeah. It's been 20-something years, man. So it's
Nick's got an opinion about that.
For a long time, it was sort of like being a Red Sox fan, except the Red Sox actually won stuff over the last 15 years. You know?
Sorry, I derailed the show right off the bat. I apologize.
Don't sweat it, man. Don't sweat it. It's not like the Dragoons are known for staying laser focused on topic over time. Anyway, it's quite all right. And anybody that got to read Walter's opus about Origins last year knows what a good ramble we can uncoil.
Oh yeah. I specialize in ponderously long Hunter S. Thompson-esque think pieces.
Yes.
So may there be.
But it was one of the ones we got some of the best comments back on also, so it was totally fine. You know, it's a great encapsulation of the experience of being at Origins.
Yeah, it was fun. It was fun.
And I think somewhere those ogres are still powering down the road together.
That was the most emotional thing I've ever written. I'm glad you made it to the end, Brant.
Yeah. Well, I have to. I'm the editor, right? I mean, but those of you wondering what we're talking about, you can find it in our Origins coverage from last summer over at the Dragoons website. Today, we are here to talk about the Postcards of War and sort of some of the small format stuff that folks do with different kinds of wargaming. And so Michael, our buddy Hissy Cat, is here. He's the guy that runs the Postcards from the Front game jam, and we're going to let him sort of talk a bit about that here in just a second. Walter, Nick, Rachel, you guys all came through the Georgetown class, right? I think we got a couple of Georgetonians here. Nick sort of, yes, Nick, I know you were affiliated with Goose as a part of it all. But am I correct? You guys are all like out of school and into the professional world at this point, though, right?
Not me.
Not yet.
Not me either. I just started Georgetown.
Oh, for some reason I thought you were done, Walter. I really thought you were done.
Oh yeah,
and I guess I'm the adult in the
famously
room.
have time to fly out to Columbus, Ohio, to attend a board game convention midweek.
So okay, so Nick is the other grown up in the room here. All right. So but yeah, all of you guys have all done a variety of design work on some small format games for different reasons, some commercial, some because you were told this is what you need to do. And so there are some unique design considerations, some unique production considerations around these things, all of which are a part of this. We're going to throw it over to Michael first. And if you want me to go ahead and pull stuff up on screen, I can, but let you talk about the Postcards from the Front competition, and then we'll let the other guys talk about some of the stuff they've done also.
Okay, so to start off with, it's not a competition.
Well, okay, fair. Sorry.
No, it's an important point because one of the things that I did when I started this was I wanted to create an entry into game design in general and war games specifically to lower the barrier, because there are people that will feel intimidated if I'm going to do a design, I'm entering a contest. And so that adds, I think, an unnecessary level of barrier or stress to some people because they just don't want to compete. I mean, you're dealing with a creative endeavor. And so I didn't want to turn it into a contest. I wanted it to be more of a game jam. And it comes from where I write software for a living, and I've done some game design software stuff. And there's a ton of game jams, and they're all about a social. Most of them are very socially centered and about the design and sharing what you do and at all levels of skill, right? So I wanted this in the wargaming space to be an entry point for people that wanted to try designing something. And it's a little misleading because you think, oh, small game, small footprint, this will be easy. It's actually quite a challenge once you kind of dive into it. I'm sure we'll get into some of what those challenges are today. But if you want to pull up the, so little background, one of the designers from, give me 1 second. I always forget the name of his game that most people know. Stealth by Sea from Nicola. And him and I at the time, what was it, Twitter? Now it's X, whatever. we're talking, and he's always posting things with small games and interesting games. And I said to him kind of jokingly, hey, somebody should do a postcard design contest. I did say contest back then and obviously changed it. And he said, yeah, somebody should do that. And a few months went by and nobody was doing it. And so here we go. I just realized you were looking at my screen. So sorry for that. And so I decided, hey, be the change you want to be, and I went out and did it. And nobody else was doing anything. And so last December, I threw this up on itch.io because it's a good place to just kind of organize things. And there were 90 some people had joined and 48 games were submitted. Some people, I think one designer put 3 games in. And so there's a link, I think I put into chat. So if you want to go, these are all free games. And you'll see there's quite a variety. And if you look at some of the designers that actually entered, we've got Mark Walker here. He put a game in, and I actually interviewed him and talked about his game. It got Thomas Van Hare of Historic Wings. He does a number of book games on Amazon, submitted a game. Excuse me. David Thompson entered a design along with Niels Johansson, the artist. This gentleman here, Dr. Eves, this particular game was picked up by Snafu Games, and they're making a larger version of it. And some of you may or may not know what David Thompson had done, but he created battle cards, which are now you can buy like from Postcard Games. And they did a Kickstarter. And you can see there's quite a few games. There's going to be 5 games in this particular series. And the point being is quite a few of these games really took off and started some larger games being published. And so it's turned into kind of a pretty nifty little social event. And Clint Davey also is doing a werewolf game. It's a coin-based post-World War II game with Spawn also. And he's working on a game now called World War II in an Hour based off of this initial design. And so this kind of exploded a bit on me. I wasn't expecting this to be quite as popular as it was. And like I said, we ended up with 48 entries. And these are all free. So if you're interested, like I said, follow the link and go download. You can print these. And there's a wide variety. I kept a very open mind as to what the definition of a war game is. It's not a rabbit hole I wanted to go down. I mean, everybody's got their opinions. So I kept a very open definition for that. And last year's jam was kind of cool because Neil actually offered his services to do a graphic makeover of one of the games. And I believe it was this one here, the Airstrike game. Although I don't know if that's the actual graphics that were redone. And that was just given away randomly. Again, it wasn't a contest. And so
I think Snafu had reached out to several of the different designers about wanting to possibly publish some with their new small format series. I don't know if they were able to come to deals with very many of them. Like you said, there's at least one that was picked up by Snafu, and I really thought there were 2 or 3 others.
Well, this one here was the Narrows, and they're making it a bit larger format. And so I'm looking forward to seeing this one when it actually gets published by Snafu. But also, so this is this year's link, but let me go back here. There's another gentleman here, Matt. Let me find his game. I'm sorry for scrolling right here. Matt Kelly is also got a game, not this game, but is published through Snafu. So point being is there are some no names like myself that entered, put a game in. And then there are quite a few well-known designers and published designers that decided to kind of throw their hat in the ring. And I think this is also Nicholas' game here. And so I put a little pressure on a few other designers that I know through Twitter and hopefully we're going to see some more games this year. I think, like I said, currently there's 14 people that have entered.
So no pressure for the other three of y'all, but the link is in the chat, so you know where to find it.
Yeah. Hey, everybody's welcome. I'd love to see you guys jump in on this.
Yeah. So there have been a bunch of postcard games that folks have seen over the years. If you were a subscriber to Against the Odds magazine or bought anything from Turning Point Sims or any of the other folks within the family from LPS, Landsneck Publishing, that does the TPS stuff and ATO magazine and whatever, that you would frequently get a small postcard game in whatever shipment they were sending you, or you could order like a full set of them from those guys. Usually the best thing to do was to immediately slap it on a photocopier and blow it up and then cut out the pieces from there, just so you could actually read the rules. But the rules fit on the postcard with everything else, the way they would do their designs. And then back when Battles magazine was a thing, 12, 13, 14 years ago at this point, I think it was Elias Nordling, although I could be mistaken, but somebody had a column in there that was specifically focused on small format games, not just postcard ones, but a variety of other similar small format games. And then they sort of disappeared for like 8 or 9, 10 years. And then, the combination of some of these smaller, quick playing ones that Sebastian's helped head up in the professional community, which is where we're going to bring our other 3 panelists in here shortly, as well as Hissy Cat getting together with Nicola and, sort of pushing for, hey, let's draw some prominence to this. Last 2 or 3 years, like, attention to this format has started to grow again, and that's kind of cool.
Yep, very much so.
All right.
In fact, this is Nicola's latest game.
All righty.
That ships with something from Snafu.
Let's get you on screen, kind of highlighted there, and let you show it off.
Yeah, so this is an example of professional quality, and there's your rules and your components, right?
I feel bad having to present my game now that that's on the screen.
Okay, no, this is a professional designer working with Snafu, and this is
I can tell
they put in their games. So
and I think, doesn't Nicola do graphics as well?
He does, I believe, but a lot of them are from Niels Johansson.
Okay.
And my God, he is just amazing. And like I said, he donated his time to do a remake of one of the games. He did the art for David Thompson's game, actually a number of them on a professional side. And then he submitted one of his own games in the game jam as well. So yeah, last year it was really crazy. It just exploded on me like a hand grenade. I wasn't prepared.
Dog chases car and catches it, and now what?
Yeah, pretty much.
So yeah, Walter, Nick, Rachel, don't sweat. Like, we're talking legit, professional published design guys here from the graphic side of things. Nobody's expecting folks to have to compete with that. Those guys have 20, 30 years in the business, getting better at what they do.
Yeah.
Unlike me, who's got 20 years in the business, not getting any better at what I do.
Well, you didn't see the art in my game for a reason.
I'm well aware that graphic design is not my passion, so go on ahead.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, so taking a look at some of the stuff the rest of you guys have. Walter, how do you want to do this? You want me to just bring up the slides? You guys kind of flip through and talk about what y'all got there a little bit? Or?
Sure. Nick, you had your slides first. Is that indicative that I can throw you under the bus and have you go first?
Yeah, of course. I like tire tracks. So you guys can see the map up there. So my game is a micro game, and Sebastian Bay approached me about contributing one of the games to this collection of micro games that he's putting together on Indo-Pacific security challenges. I work with the Marines, so they're always thinking about China, South China Sea. But I personally wanted to take it a little bit of a different direction and do something non-kinetic. And this game is one that is on FONOPS, Freedom of Navigation Operations. So it's a war game in the sense that they are both sides. It's a 2-player game, are trying to compete mutually conflicting objectives for prestige, essentially, which is a measure of how successful their freedom of navigation operations have been. If anyone has questions about what that is, kind of what that is. But that's essentially when the U.S. or some other nation goes into disputed maritime claims, such as the South China Sea, Spratlys, and they conduct operations such as military operations that would normally not be allowed in territorial water claims, with the assumption being that the U.S. would not do that if it recognized the legitimacy there. So when I sat down to actually work on the game, the first thing I wanted to do was kind of bring out the essence that this is a standoff. There's a lot of uncertainty here, and even though they are engaging in provocative actions, both sides, there is definitely a limit. There's kind of a hard line before it turns from just action short of war to an actual flashpoint. And so if you can go to the next slide.
Let's do it.
Yeah. The game actually has a tension mechanic where they're taking these actions such as, dangerous maneuvers, doing military operations that raise the tension. But at the beginning of the game, you have this secret tension limit that you don't share. So you don't know where the other person's red line is. And as you're going through, you've got to kind of keep that in mind, try and get any clues based on that person's actions to see whether it's smart to escalate, because you have to escalate a little bit in order to get your prestige points. And if you cause the balloon to pop, if you go over a tension limit, you lose immediately.
As a designer, I really like how you did that. That was so creative when you told me about that on the call. I was like, that's like a really, really nice idea. So I just wanted to shout out Nick that's a cool thing he did in this game.
Yeah, so it turned into a little bit of a bluffing game, and the rest of, because the actual mechanics are fairly simple, it's mostly just been a matter of, kind of playing around, doing a lot of play testing to make sure that the values are correct. I initially just had like a 1d6 be determine the tension level, but I decided there's not enough room for latitude, so we bumped it up. It can be anywhere between 3 to 18, so it's 3d6 for the tension limit. So there's kind of a lot of ambiguity about where the other person's red line may be, and it definitely encourages some conservative play, and which is honestly reflective of how these real world operations have tended to go, just because of how cautious, and they don't want to, nobody wants to be the one that starts a world war or even a flashpoint. So yeah, that is my game in a nutshell. So
how long did it take you to do that?
Whoa.
Go ahead, Michael.
Sorry, it's very interesting. How long did it take you to put this together and get it all play tested and to this point?
It took me about one evening to actually write up and actually put most of the various kind of gameplay assets together, write out the base version of the rules, and then I was tinkering with it for about a month, and then I kind of had the epiphany about the having a conversation with Sebastian and Rachel, who's also on this call, about the tension mechanics, and that really helped inform my thinking on how I was going to kind of change what I had already written down. So, probably about a month and a half from inception to finish.
Very cool.
So I was going to ask a design question. Just when you went from 1d6 up to 3d6, obviously that gives you a wider spread of numbers, but it also gives you a bell curve of distribution to where you're going to end up with those middle numbers a little more often. Was that intentional, or is that just something you were willing to live with to get the wider spread of numbers rather than have to shift away from D6s to 10s or 12s or 20s?
I liked the distribution a lot better. You are naturally going to get a bell curve, but there's also, there's anomalies to that. And given that it's secret information, you can't really plan around what the other person's tension limit is. And, I think it also reflects a real world reality that the red line for the US and the red line for China, they may be different, but they're probably not going to be polar opposites in a game where, I roll 3 6s and you roll 3 1s to set our tension limits. That reflects an extreme anomaly and encourages some really divergent behavior from what we actually see. So, it's interesting, but it's also not necessarily reflective. And so I just looking at the probabilities table, I liked it better with that distribution.
No, it makes sense. I mean, some folks don't want to get away from D6s, particularly when it's a non-gamer audience, just because those funny shaped dice start to throw people. And you know,
and
what the
the
hell's
fact
a
that this
D12? You know,
this was designed to be print and play, and you have much better
Yeah.
chance of having somebody with a D6 or multiple D6s than any D10 or D12. So
yeah, folks have Yahtzee boxes around their house.
exactly.
Yeah, no, it sounds cool. So, all right, Walter, what's next in the queue here?
Oh, sure. So next up is my game, which is an evacuation game. So it's important to understand that I've never made a micro game before, so this is a very fun exercise for me. This is called Spider's Thread. It's about Japanese evacuation of the first island chain, which is a policy that JSDF has stated they're trying to implement, and they've run drills on it before. And it's also important to understand that the way I design games, it's very much like I'm a beleaguered shoemaker in a fairy tale, where Sebastian approaches me and he's like, I need a game about civilian evacuation, and I need it by this date. And then I get drunk and little elves finish the game for me while I'm asleep. So it's not sparked by any organic interest in civilian evacuation, though I find it's an interesting topic, and I know more about it certainly when I started. The base game is a D6 based game like Nick's game is, because accessibility was also a concern for me. At the beginning of the game, you outlay your resources. You have 5 D6 in a pool, and you outlay them between air and naval for evacuation. All these spaces on the board here are muster points that people can actually mass at. Each island has different ports and airports, which aren't on the space board. They're punch outs, so you can customize islands. A big part of this game for me was an emphasis on modularity and making things applicable to multiple situations. So when you look at my tokens here, I have tokens for airfields and ports, but also for small airfields and small ports that can accommodate less ships or less planes per turn. I realized kind of midway through that the chief design challenge of this game was how much of it to base on the actual islands like the Sakashima Islands, or to take a step back and make it more of a sandbox. And I deliberately leaned into the second approach because I thought it would make the game more replayable and more interesting if you could shuffle around the airports and ports on the islands, if there's certain islands with no airports and only, seaports. I think that was a good decision. We were kind of playing through the game, and at its base setup, we were like, this kind of plays the same every time. And so we hit on, I think where we really, really came into our own with design was when we were like, oh, well, the reason it doesn't feel like we're making impactful decisions is because there's no limit in the game rules for how many planes can land at a certain airport or be shunted there, or how many boats can land at a certain place. Once we introduced that and introduced scarcity, the idea that you had unlimited space to evacuate people, it became a lot more realistic and a lot more interesting. And so I was very proud of kind of how it play tested. The timeline for this, I drew up the basic game on a piece of notebook paper on a plane back from Peru. And then I basically play tested it for a month and a half. It plays very quickly. You have Japanese and foreign nationals, and you get different objectives for evacuating both of them. And it is a one-player game. It's not a true war game in any sense of the word, because it felt kind of on the nose to have a red player who was rolling dice to shoot down planes full of civilians. I was like, let's not stray into that. But as you look at this map here, this red line represents the hot zone. And as the turns go by, the hot zone creeps up and up and up until it encompasses more of the islands. And your evacuation operations get harder to do once they're in the hot zone. I deliberately kept it as turns rather than days, again, to have a sense of ambiguity. So this could theoretically represent any length of time, any island chain that you theoretically wanted to. Another step back from sort of like grounding it in a very specific circumstance. And then we introduced also a bunch of optional variant rules for the game. because you do play it essentially by yourself, although you could certainly play it against a friend and try and score yourself. We put in a bunch of variant rules so you can customize the difficulty to your heart's content. Rules for randomly removing ports and airfields every turn if they get damaged or get hit by strikes. Stuff like that we think makes the game really interesting. And I would encourage anyone who actually wants to play this game. I don't know quite where it will be distributed yet because Sebastian's like an oracle who just foresees that it goes somewhere at some point. But anyone who wants to play this game, I encourage you to design your own rules for it as well, because that's how it's meant to be played. Make your own pieces even that aren't included in this base piece setup. I think game design's fun and everyone should have their hand in it, not just me. And I'm excited to see where the game goes. And if it can teach you a little something about civilian evacuation, so much the better. Anyway. Brant, you are muted.
You're muted.
Yeah, I was trying to like cut down on background noise. I was saying if only you knew somebody with a website that could host such games and allow people to download and print them. I mean,
if only, what
a wacky and crazy idea.
How will we find one of those?
Yeah.
Those kinds of people don't come along very often.
Yeah, who saw that coming? So, all right, what do we got next in the shoot here?
I think I am the last one.
Let's pull her up.
Yeah, go to that one.
Click his way along here.
Go right to the scorecard.
Yo.
So this is my game. Font is very small because the rules are longer than the paper allowed. So basically, for context, my background for the last 2-ish years has been studying China and the Indo-Pacific in terms of media analysis. And so I studied influence operations a lot. And so this being my first full doing it myself game, I picked something I was really comfortable with. And so this Battle for the Ballot is a hyper simplified model of the competition for influence between the US and China in the event of a referendum for independence on Taiwan. The players are, the one represents the PRC, which is supporting the KMT to shut down the vote for independence, whereas the US is supporting the DPP, supporting the vote for independence. And the basic functionality of it is players are selecting from a list of 4 options, and each actor has a different set of options because we work with different con ops kind of thing. And they pick those options in order to gain support across the district's scorecard. And at the end of each turn, whoever has the greater percentage of support moves their support marker plus or minus 1 on the meter on the bottom. And you go through 4 turns and then at the end, roll for adjudication to figure out who wins the vote for independence, the DPP or the KMT. And my purpose in making this game was demonstrating the level of risk between investing in actions that could have really high impact, but are not guaranteed to succeed. The US can implement foreign military sales and do a ton of Taiwan Strait transits. And when they do succeed in the public media realm, they do really well, but there's often a chance that nobody hears about them, no one writes about them. And if you're working on a finite timeline, doing things that gain you less support, but are guaranteed to gain you support, might be more beneficial.
So we've got kind of an interesting dichotomy here, though, a little bit, because the things you guys were designing were all for a particular training or practitioner or professional development sort of purpose, not just, hey, let's make a fun game, which is a lot of what Michael's Postcards from the Front were chasing around. That said, while there are lessons to be learned in the designs that you guys put together, ultimately there does need to be some element of fun to maintain some engagement with your audience so that it's not, because look, let's face it, in a professional context, you can always order somebody to go play a game like that. That can always happen. But in terms of trying to maintain engagement from the players such that they want to do this and want to do it multiple times to get the maximum amount of kind of learning effect, where do you kind of strike that balance between I want my players to have a good time versus there's a lesson that needs to come out of this. Nick, we'll throw it to you first and then go, from there to whoever.
So for me, as I was approaching the game from that angle, I didn't give too much thought to, balance of fun versus not fun. I always like games with imperfect information. I personally find them already kind of inherently fun just because, especially if you're playing with somebody and like friends, professional, whatever, you can be like, oh, I thought you were doing that. You bluffed it really well. Bluffing games, I think, have kind of an inherent tension, an inherent challenge that does draw people in. So in that sense, I wasn't giving too much thought to that. I was, however, trying to make sure that there were realistic outcomes that were being reflected in the range of outcomes. I didn't, as I mentioned, it does leave the door open for something, that's kind of widely divergent from real world behavior. But the kind of the bell curve, the main probability, the main band, it's going to be fairly representative of, they're going to be conservative. They're going to be not trying to do too much. And that was something that I wanted them to get out of that. So, if they do act wild, they do act kind of freewheeling, they'll lose. So, that can be fun in itself. Losing is a great way to learn. You often learn more from that. So,
yeah. It's,
oh no, I do
not
play
to
the
do.
Kriegspiel. I do play Kriegspiel. I see that in the chat. Love me some Kriegspiel. So
yeah, that's partly Jan playing off of your imperfect information, and partly Jan trying to get some more participants for their game tomorrow. So
intent, come and run a game for us.
To answer the similar question, I think the hardest part of designing these microgames for me is maintaining that fun, because it is simplifying the model of reality down so far. And I can do the assume away this because it doesn't matter, but introducing back in the chance of fun and the competition and the either side could win, I think is the part that I have been the most frustrated with in designing the microgames that I have. And the first edition of the game that you all just saw was not fun. It was too based in reality. And I think the suspending reality for the sake of the game is a skill that you learn as a designer in a commercial doing it for fun setting that you don't learn in somebody is being told by their boss to come sit and play my game, which I thought was a very interesting part of this task I didn't expect to learn.
If you need to tell somebody to go play a game, it's already the engagement's already gone. So
exactly.
Yeah, well, to an extent. I mean, there's times where you will have folks who are willing to play once they find out what it is, but they may need to be ordered to get in the room. Yeah. But again, that's something that exists in the professional practitioner world that doesn't really exist in the hobby world. Hissy can't shove postcard games down people's throats and say, here, play this or else. He's got to be a little more persuasive about some of the stuff that he's throwing out there. So,
did I interrupt you, Rachel? I'm sorry.
No.
I thought someone started talking. That's definitely my curse, is to keep talking over.
Well, we're twins in that. I do that all the time.
To answer Brant's question, from my angle, for educational games, fun comes first. It has to. I work entirely in educational games, so I don't do analytical at this point in my career. And I will torch an entire game from the bottom to the top if it's not fun at the outset. Because like you said, Brant, the foundation of learning is replayability. And no one will replay a game if they don't have a fun time the first time. Phil Sabin, who wrote Simulating War, it's a great book, but he talks about how microgames are actually the best games to teach, period. You shouldn't even try to teach people with longer games. He says they are the premier learning tool for that. At certain points in my process when I was designing this game, it played well. It played, technically, it was a game, right? But it was not fun yet. I had to dig in to find places to make play more interesting, and to kind of make your decisions matter more. And we kind of hit a good spot on that, I would say. What I would say is that it is challenging, but anyone who designs games knows when a game has that jouissance, that kind of that stopping point where you can be like, all right, this actually kind of slaps. We can roll with this. This is a good kind of bedrock for us to base the rest of the game on. And then you can start weaving in technical stuff, right? But yeah, that's my answer on this.
Yeah. So Michael, is some of the stuff that you saw come in for the game jam last year? I got to keep training myself out of calling it a contest, because I keep wanting to call it a contest, and you've been very clear that it was not that. So I'm trying to be good about not saying the C word here. But some of the ones that you saw come in, I mean, obviously there's a little bit of goofiness in there. There were some folks just being very experimental about certain things. But there were clearly, some lessons to be learned out of some of the games as well. The ones that you saw in terms of playability versus fun versus balance versus the gimmick of being a small format game. Who do you think did a particularly good job of kind of striking some of the balance in some of those things?
Oh, wow, okay. So in full disclosure, out of the 48 games, I've only played about a third of them. Just because, I mean, I run a YouTube channel. I play a lot of war games, and just time permitting to get to all of them. But again, dealing with some of the games that were done by professional designers, one of the, and I'll answer your question, but kind of one of the things I was curious about is I was struck by how many pros jumped into this jam, and because I originally expected maybe 5 people, right? Just me and a few of my friends just doing whatever. And a lot of them basically, and I'm going to kind of sort of summarize this, but they when I talked to them, they said that this was just an opportunity to do something that they could try out, maybe a mechanic, or maybe there was a topic they wanted to cover, but it wasn't a full game, to get published type of thing. And Mark Walker had said to me when I was interviewing him that he went over his rule book word by word and just cut and cut to where he could get those rules to the least number of words to express what he wanted that game to do. And he said that was the biggest challenge, was to get that thing down to where you don't have 3-point font on the back of your card, right? Because obviously these are all digital files. You can download them, print them 4x, which is what I do, quite honestly. When I play these, I don't have time to read small font.
Yeah. Rachel, he didn't mention you by name.
Oh, no, trust me, you should have seen mine. I was struggling to get my rules on, and I thought I had a fairly simple system. But that was in that sense. Again, there were some games that were done by people who had just done their first games, and they had an idea. Excuse me. And I think for the most part, they're all fairly well balanced and playable to some degree. And again, I tried to create a space where you don't have to worry about failing. You fail by not participating. And on that note, all your games, guys, that you've done, enter them into the jam. You retain all rights. We don't sell anything, although I'm working with something with the Dietz Foundation, which I'm fumbling the ball on to publish last year's. But feel free to post your game up on the jam. People will play it. They'll rate it. You'll get some feedback. So, and there's no cost to you. And again, you retain all rights. You can, make millions off of it later when you get that big publishing contract. So, right. But so no, I think for the most part, the skill level was from first time to somebody like Mark Walker, who's been designing games for 250 odd years, I think, at this point. Right. So.
Yeah. It sometimes seems like it. Mark's been around. He's been doing this for over 25 years at this point.
Yeah. And his game is, I played it. It's, what do they call those? Oh, there's a style of game where now it's totally out of my head now that I'm on camera here to remember the game style. But and you guys are talking about fun. When I design games, fun is hard because what I think is fun, it maybe is not what somebody else thinks is fun. And when you're talking about how you want to represent something that's historical, which I know you guys were kind of tasked to do to some degree, one of the things I try to do with my designs is I try to focus on the experience that somebody's getting out of playing the game. Fun being one aspect of that experience. There's the learning aspect. Each of your designs is very interesting in kind of a real world setting, and that unto itself, to me, I want to feel that experience. Rachel was saying her game was a little too real. That's not necessarily a bad thing. What may be boring is also educational, because there are people that are going to be geeks that are going to sit there and go, oh my God, this is so cool. And I have the gaming experience of something that is almost real world. And I think to some degree, I would suggest keeping as much of that in there as you can. And, chasing the fun monster sometimes is difficult to find what fun is. But I
think
that was something that I definitely, because my taste in games is very different than everyone else's, and war gamers, they're only one niche of the gaming market, and there's a whole world out there. So
I don't know. War gamers are 3 or 4 different niches of the gaming market.
Yeah. Luckily, there aren't too many opinionated war gamers. You don't encounter. It's all a bunch of mellow.
Yeah, nobody's ever rivet counted, not once. But so that for me, obviously fun wasn't trying to make it not fun, but keeping in mind my original purpose, which is creating something educational, engaging. I don't necessarily think that fun is necessarily necessary for learning. Engagement, something challenging, something interesting, not necessarily fun. So that's what I was kind of approaching it from. Fun is always extra, fun is always great, but it wasn't like necessarily my number one priority at the end of the day. So
cool.
Yeah, I mean, look, people have different conceptions of fun also.
Yeah, exactly.
I marvel daily at the number of people in my neighborhood that go out jogging for fun, and and wonder just what the hell's wrong with these people. But yeah, I mean, fun for you is not necessarily fun for somebody else. One of the things, Michael, going back to your point about, don't be afraid to make things seem very real. This may be one of those places where the practitioner world and the hobby world definitely diverge in certain things, because there can be, there isn't always, but I've seen it happen where there can be a problem with using real things in your portrayals, because if something comes across as particularly unflattering to someone in the hobby world, we shrug and we say, well, you should have been less of an asshole. I would have made you less of one in the game. But in the professional world, you don't always get that luxury, because in the professional or practitioner world, you've got sort of the stamp of officialness that gets slapped on these games as this is kind of an official act of this organization or this group or this military, body or whatever.
Yeah.
And now it becomes the official opinion of that organization that you're an asshole. And that can be a little tougher to defend in public sometimes. So that might be a case where, Rachel may end up providing one sort of mellowed out version to professionals, but has no problem, going slash and burn on somebody in a hobby context.
And that's a good point, because they're doing it in a controlled environment to some degree, where, to your point, in the hobby world, I could have, I did Pickett's Charge. I could have done it with orcs, or whatever. And so I think that's a valid point. And I know I've been all over Sebastian about getting a design out of him for this jam. So if you guys could, help me in that quest by peer pressure as much as possible, because I believe the event you guys are doing was inspired by what we did last year in the game jam. So I look at all of your games as kind of my grandchildren at this point.
That's very flattering. I was just saying,
Sebastian will just assign it to somebody and slap his name on it.
No. I told him, I said, I'm not going to buy his Littoral Commander unless he gives me a postcard game.
Yeah.
So,
Sebastian wouldn't do that. He's too nice of a guy to take credit for stuff like that.
wheeling kind of back to Michael and Brant's talk a little bit about what's fun for you isn't fun for everyone else. And I feel like there's a great James Cameron interview, one of my personal idols, a great director, where he talks about in Avatar 1, a studio executive hauls him into an office. And they're like, why do we have the scene of Jake Sully flying on the flying creature twice? We already saw this. You already established they can do this. And James Cameron says, because I wanted to see it. I wanted to see it. And if I want to see it, I know someone else is going to want to see it too.
mm-hmm.
And that's where I come from in games. Is if I find something fun, I'm not worried too much about, oh, will other people like this or will other people not like it? If I want to see it, other people are, if I find it fun, I know someone else is going to find it fun. I can't be alone in, in my instinct in finding things fun. And I don't think any of us really are. So yeah, that's my take on it, at least.
Yeah.
I'm going to tee Michael up with a bit of a question here, but you guys will be able to see where this is going for the three of y'all as well. Michael, in talking with some of the designers that had entered the Game Jam last year, and maybe some folks asking questions coming in this year, look, going back to there are only so many original ideas in the world, and there are folks that have, blatantly ripped off other perfectly good ideas from other people in terms of inspiration and the research they did to find interesting mechanics, interesting graphical presentations of things, interesting ways to represent what's going on the map. I know Russ Wardle had entered a postcard. I think he had sent it in for your jam last time. It was The Last Stand of the Swiss Guards.
Okay.
Yeah, I got to watch that get played at Buckeye Game Fest last year as he was refining it before he finally sent the entry in. He had a couple of cards on the side. One of the mechanics that he had in there that I thought was pretty cool was the turn marker. So the topic of the game is the Swiss Guards trying to hold out in a particular building in the Vatican while the Pope escapes from the onrushing hordes of, I think it was the Holy Roman Empire, but I'm probably mistaken on that, and Russ will correct me later. But the turn marker is the Pope moving down the escape tunnel on his way out. And so you get this cool graphical representation of the Pope actually getting away that also serves to show how much time is left in the game. Did folks, explicitly say, oh yeah, I, sort of combined these three ideas from these three places to kind of throw into this game? Did anybody specifically talk about something like that? Or are there a couple of that are pretty obvious? Like, oh yeah, this is just a shrunk down version of this other thing. And then, guys obviously coming to y'all sort of where some of your inspirations came from on some of the mechanics and ideas that you used. Michael, what if something came out of those?
I haven't been doing it lately. Life got in the way, but at one point I was doing a podcast of Postcards from the Front on my channel, and I was bringing on the designers talking specifically about their game and what those motivations were and where those thoughts came from to design. And quite honestly, they're kind of all over the board. There was one gentleman who is really big into ancients, and so he looks at a number of different games. Save Our City. Richard is his name, and I met him at San Diego Histicon, and he's doing some stuff with coin and play testing, and he's really big into the ancients, and he wanted to do one where you're defending your city, but you have to kind of keep your guards kind of on your side, and so it's kind of a man management type of game. Because your guards could flip on you and then your city could get overrun. And so that was a very specific theme that he wanted to, or a story he wanted to tell, or an experience that he built into his game. Mark Walker took his vampire-ish world and built excuse me, his game in that world. And so he wanted to get back to just designing a small footprint game, and he used a much larger world that he's published a number of games as his backdrop for. I know David Thompson posted a pretty in-depth design discussion about his Market Garden game, which then led to the Kickstarter for the Battle Card series. And now that's got 3 of the 5 games have been designed for that. So everybody kind of approached it a little bit different. There wasn't, the only restriction was kind of the size, and it had to be a war game. And there's one that Ants versus Termites. There's the Great Emu War. Okay, somebody took that on. If you look at what Thomas Van Heer did with, when I talked with him, and he's with Historical Wings, and he's done a number of book games you can pick up on Amazon. And he's got myself and the guys from the, I think it's the War Room podcast, as we all have an aircraft in that, and we're supposed to be fighting King Kong, right? And he said that each of the characters, he tried to take our personality and build that into the characteristics of how that particular unit plays. And so I need to reach out to oh my God, I'm forgetting all their names, but Tony and Rough Swordsman and
Rough Swordsman. Is ID Jester one of them?
ID Jester, thank you. So the 4 of us are represented in that game, and so I'd love to get all 4 of us to play our characters and kind of see how that game plays out to the design. And so there were a lot of different approaches, and one of the things to keep in mind with a small, especially a postcard game, is one of my recommendations would be you and I think it's kind of enforced by the format, is you can't really design a super detailed game with 10, 12, 15 mechanics. You have to kind of come up with one mechanic that kind of drives everything. And maybe if you're creative enough and verbose in your rules, you can maybe fit a second type of mechanic in there. And as a beginning or amateur designer, I think that helps you focus on learning certain types of things. And so when we look at the different games that are here, each of them have kind of one main mechanic that then is used to describe the event or the experience that they're trying to put across with their game. And I think that's where the small-sided games are really, really useful. If you jump into game design and you want to do, I don't know, DAC 2, for example, yeah, you're never going to get it done. I mean, that's huge, right? It's 5 maps. It takes up 3 rooms in your house and 2 million counters. So when you do the small footprint thing, you can focus on some very simple mechanics, strive for theme, learn how to write rules concise. You can go from start to finish in what'd you say, a month, 2 months?
Yeah, about.
Yeah, and so it's something you can do and you learn from, and that game can spawn into a larger game. And a number of the ones in the Jam have done just that. They started out as this core idea that you could attach more mechanics and expand, and some of them ultimately will happen and along those lines. And so, but it builds your repertoire, your toolbox as a designer to say, I've done this type of game, or I've used this mechanic, or I've explored this space. And speaking on your career, as it were, as a game designer, this is just one step and one game that allows you to, I think, to kind of do that. And so, circle back to your question, Brent. A lot of these guys come, and guys being non-gender specific, come from all different backgrounds and different approaches and themes that they're trying to do and mechanics. And I think everybody did a really good job, quite honestly, because it's not easy to do something so small and get your vision across. And it sounds like the 3 people here have also done that. And it sounds like you guys were successful.
Yeah, it's a lot easier to boil an egg than boil the ocean. Yeah. So, Rachel, what about? I mean, was there something that you looked to for some kind of inspiration, whether it was wargaming or not? But mechanically where you drew some of those ideas from? And like, look, you can't copyright a game mechanic, so don't sweat it. Nobody's coming after you, but
I think for the one that I spoke about earlier, the mechanics are very simple. It is these are your decision options, make a decision. But I think part of that comes from 100% stealing Sebastian's words of there are people that grew up playing games that have a game knowledge that you can't learn in a classroom. You can't learn working for the military or for DoD. It's the basis of sitting down and learning every game you possibly can to learn every mechanic you possibly can. I don't have that. I've played every single game on the bookshelf background like Nick and Walter do. And so I use these micro game design challenges as an excuse to go out and learn more mechanics. Mm-hmm. And so that was the first one that we did, but working on another game now where we're using a deck of cards as our board and using like the suit and war mechanic from like Frederick of using the suits and playing war with cards kind of thing. As the more that I am exposed to different mechanics, the more that I can hone in on one and make a game out of a new mechanic. So it's a very roundabout way of saying yes, but not for the one I showed you.
No problem. Nick, Walter, one of y'all.
Walter, you can go on ahead.
You're a prince among men, Nick.
Oh, okay. I don't know what
for the last 2 years. I've been obsessed with a Games Workshop property called Warcry that has a very clever D6 based initiative and sort of, I guess, like power, like resource point system where you roll dice and doubles are powerful, triples are more powerful, quads are even more powerful. You spend those on abilities. And I was like, what if I stole that and used that in this game? And long story short, that did not work really well for something at this scale. It didn't really, it really was kind of detracting from the game. And it was almost too much dice rolling for such a little effect. But kind of working around this mechanic of you have 6 or 5, I changed it to 5 dice because there's 6 islands and I wanted you to be unable to, even if you evenly allocated all your resources, to get people off all 6 islands in one turn. So the idea of the dice pool came from Warcry. And then the people mechanics came from, not from a specific game, I guess sort of worker placement games like Scythe, where an evacuation game I always figured would be kind of a moving people around game. And so I knew I had to have some physical representation of that. But yeah, that's the inspo, I guess, that I took from other games.
Yeah. For me, as I mentioned earlier, I'm really, really into games that have information asymmetry because, games are all about decision making. Decision making at the end of the day is largely about what we know and what we don't know. So there's a lot of games that, Kriegspiel was mentioned earlier, love Kriegspiel, games like, for example, Triumph and Tragedy, where you don't even know the exact composition of the enemy force before you attack, unless you've got a certain... you've already engaged them in combat and you've been tracking what they're doing, stuff like that. So those were definitely games that kind of inspired me, like, okay, want to bring in something like that. And then also the game is also about risk management because even if you do everything right, you play conservatively, you can still lose. And one of the games that inspired me on that end was I play a lot of Mahjong. And that's a game where you can play a perfect hand and you can still lose. You can still get your ass whooped. So that was, wanting to kind of balance, I want to go for more points versus I need to kind of just call it quits and hope the other person busts. In that sense, that and Blackjack, those were kind of the inspirations on that. So
interesting. So,
all right, you guys got questions for each other at all? Like, I feel like I'm interrogating this.
No. I'm going to throw out another. I'll throw this out and see what the group thinks. But one of I think the benefits of designing a small footprint game, and you get this. I've designed non-war games as well, and there's a thing, a concept of game balance. especially in multiplayer games, if one side is overly powered or gets extremely lucky and the game ends. And my thought process on that, especially with short games that don't take a long time to play, meaning 15, 20 minutes, when I design a game, balance is one of the least of my concerns. Again, I design for experience, and if every now and then one player just dominates everybody else and wins in 3 moves, if the game takes 15 minutes, set up and play another game. Don't worry about the balance. What are your guys' thoughts on balance? And did that come into play with any of your designs to try to, even though it's a small footprint game, did you try to balance out the, dare I say, fairness of play? We'll start with Rachel.
Oh God. I think that it's one of the things where I wanted a perceived imbalance, but I wanted an equal chance of each person to be able to win. And so giving each actor a different set of options that have different probabilities and different outcomes and different impacts, and then play testing them over and over to make sure that there was a actual practiced balance, even though when you read through them, you're like, oh, well, blue has like every advantage possible. They're definitely going to win. But if you play it through, they don't actually play in that way. Mm-hmm. The balance is important to me as a competitive player. I want the ability to win no matter who I'm playing as. And so I want my players to both have a chance at winning. But sometimes the scenario doesn't lend itself to that. Like if you're building a micro game to teach a lesson where blue is going to lose every single time because we're unprepared and that's the lesson you want your player to learn, yeah, that game shouldn't be balanced.
Yeah.
I fully agree with what Rachel's putting down. For me, made a game that was relatively proximate for strength. So it's not like, and it's not even kinetic. So it's fairly balanced in that sense. But you don't need to have a balanced game scenario. Stuff like Littoral Commander. You can get your ass whooped in the first turn, and that is a learning moment.
Yeah.
I think for educational games, balance, or the idea of balance, is one of the most dangerous things you can introduce to a group of people. Like feeling the pressure to make stuff balanced is actually not very educational when you're trying to teach people how something would actually go.
Good point.
It's great for commercial games, even asymmetric commercial games. You need to have that. And that makes them really interesting and kind of adds a lot of depth to them. When I was designing this game, it's a 1-player game because evacuation operations, your real enemy is time. And your enemy is the turn tracker itself. And there's no compelling way for a second player to really be introduced. So I found I was kind of under the false impression I realize now that 1-player games could never be fun when I designed this. So you can look forward to me going insane on Twitter as I post through turn by turns of Empire of the Sun solo play system. Shout out to Clint Warren Davey, who's been doing that on Twitter for the last month, it feels like. Go follow Clint. He's a smart guy.
You get a week off, though, because he's on vacation this week.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, Cliff entered the Game Jam last year with one of his designs. He's a cool dude.
Yeah, that's the one that became 1 Hour World War II.
Yep.
Yeah. So, well,
I think balance for educational games, to close out, not actually very educational, kind of a relic of commercial design, and can in fact even be like harmful variant on what you're actually trying to demonstrate.
Yeah, you don't want to do negative learning.
Yeah. Well, I think the challenge comes in sort of like how you define balance. Because chess is balanced, right? Everybody's got the same pieces. You got the same opportunity to do everything. And it's all up to you how it unfolds. The Alamo is unbalanced, right? It just is. Like there is no practical way to put a balanced ratio of forces in the Alamo without completely upsetting the historical apple cart. But you can still balance the outcomes of the game by shifting the objectives for each side. Like there's no mathematical way the Texans are going to kill everybody surrounding them at the Alamo. They just don't have enough bullets. Like it can't happen. Like you'd have to kill 4 dudes with every bullet to make a difference. And that's just the physics are not on your side. But you can balance the outcome of the game with, hey, did you hold out longer historically than the Texans originally did? And so maybe that's where your sort of game balance can come in. Now, again, this doesn't get back to Walter's point about the educational games where life is just unbalanced, and part of what you're learning is how to manage the lack of balance. But there are games where the on-table situation is not balanced. It's not fair. To make it fair or balanced would be to be wildly ahistorical, but you could still balance the game by giving both sides different outcomes that could have an equal probability of occurring based on how you play. And I think that's something that some designers sometimes lose sight of. Hey, the force ratio is completely off in this. There's no chance these guys have a win. No, the Germans are not going to, doesn't matter how successful the bulge is, the Germans are still losing World War II. The numbers are not on their side. Like the U.S. never got above about a 40% war footing. If we'd actually gotten serious about it, it would have been really ugly. That's just sort of where it is. But can you make a balanced game out of the bulge by, did the Germans exceed their historical objectives, or did they get there faster than they did originally, or whatever? Did the Allies stop the Germans faster than they did historically? And so with some outcome-based balance, I think you can make things a little more even for the two sides. Again, on the commercial hobbyist side, that's probably more desirable. And the point, go back to Walter's point of, and Nick's point, in a training, learning, education environment, that may be entirely irrelevant and in fact counterproductive.
I think that this in part goes back to our earlier conversation as well of like finding the fun versus the reality part of it. Of where do you suspend reality for the sake of fairness and having a real competition versus staying true to your scenario. And I think that like modifying the objectives is a very useful way to do that in a more commercial hobby kind of game. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Well, I think a good example of that is the Valiant Defense series from David Thompson, where you take a side that historically was grossly outnumbered and is going to lose, but it's about, one, learning about that particular conflict, and two, as you mentioned, Brent, some goals or objectives within the game so that you could win the game even though you're playing the losing side.
Yeah. Well, and over on the professional analytical side, I mean, there are some things that are run with the intent of you zero out at the end. Chris Weave likes to use the term test to destruction. Somebody's going to look at that and go, well, obviously this solution is no good because everything breaks at the end. And in the meantime, you're saying, well, the whole point was to see how long it lasts. Yeah. Right. I mean, we knew it was going to be zeroed out at the end. The question is, how long does it take to get there? So that, that's definitely a mechanic worth kind of considering and juggling. Audience, aside from saying nice things on occasion, y'all really haven't asked a whole lot of questions here.
Are we boring?
Is that kind of disappointing?
Yeah, I'm boring. That's for sure.
Yeah. You guys are like, being very solicitous and very complimentary of the panel, which is nice. Like they're good people. We want to keep them happy and bring them back sometime. But don't be afraid to poke at them some with some good questions here, or even some mediocre questions. That's okay too.
Yeah. If we don't get questions, I'll just have to start ripping on Newcastle for a little bit.
Yeah. Well, not hard. They ended up losing.
Stream shuts down if that happens.
So Brent, I'm an Arsenal fan, and we didn't end the year very well.
Yeah. We are a split household here. My son, for whatever reason, is a Chelsea fan. My wife's a Gunner. I'm a Magpie, and my daughter just wants us to all shut up. So,
and that's pronounced Gooner, by the way, not Gunner.
Yes, it is a Gooner.
Yeah, my daughter's a Chelsea fan, and I don't know if I dropped her when she was a child or what, but
Yeah. We are a house of split loyalties here. But we've been a long time soccer household. I mean, my son played for a year in college. I mean, but I've been playing over 40 years now, and we both. I'm here today and not at work. Normally Saturdays I run the local indoor soccer facility. I'm the adult supervision on the weekends there.
Oh, very cool.
So I took the day off to be here, hanging out with you guys, not fielding questions from our audience that can't be bothered to ask them. So
I've got a few. So
for you all, I know you guys. What are you guys looking to design in terms of micro games in the near future or postcard games? Besides this, Walter, Rachel, Michael.
I would do one that was more kinetic because I did not get really the opportunity to do that with this chosen topic, which is fine. When you attend Georgetown and when you swear yourself at the foot of Georgetown blood obelisk that exists under the main campus, you forfeit some of your choice in terms of what you get to design. And that's what it's like being in kind of the professional, like non-commercial war game designing space too. 99% of the times you have no choice over what you're being asked to design a game about. But yes, to Nick's point, if I were doing a micro game, it'd be very interesting to balance a 2-player one with kinetic action in between participants, because that would be, I don't know, I just think that'd be very interesting.
I think you misspoke. I think you meant to say when you do one for this year's postcard jam.
That's right.
That's where we were going with that, right?
Well, let me add something as well. So one of the things in the postcard jam is you don't have to come up with a new design. Okay, so it's not like you have to start when your design has to start when the jam starts. You could have designed a game 10 years ago and enter it. You could take 3 years and then enter one. So if you guys have got games you're working on or think that, hey, it's too late for me to get involved, I tried to eliminate any barriers or any excuses for anybody, myself included, to not design a game. Oh, I can't, I'm busy this year. Well, start it this year and enter it next year, because I'm not going to let you have any excuses to not design that next great game, because quite honestly, I want to play your game. So, Walter, I am expecting to see an entry.
Well, you didn't call out any of the other two guys. Rachel.
You have your idea.
Give me a chance. Rachel, I expect to see one, obviously. And Nick, I've asked you for your games. Post them up there, and then come up. And you have whatever you want. Just whatever is a war game to you. And we've also expanded it to kind of the Christmas card size. So you can do a full 8.5 by 11 if you can't, design a real postcard game. I've given you a little more real estate. Again, lowering that barrier of entry so that you can get a game design. So I'm not taking no for an answer.
Oh, of course. What about you, Rachel?
I really like the problems that people don't think about kind of games. So the influence one was big for me because it was my background. There's another game that I really want to make about undersea cable cutting, because again, it's just something people don't think about. And I think it's a really interesting thing to talk about in terms of like, if it becomes a intentional gray zone activity and an island loses all of its internet, what does that mean? Like making a game about conceal reveal, and how do you balance that? Can you make it small enough to be simple enough to do something like this? Those like non-conventional, definitely in no way, shape, or form kinetic. Walter can have all of those games. But what about you, Nick? What's your next game?
So my background, just give you a little bit. I'm a Arab studies background, so the Middle East is my field, and Libya in particular. And nobody knows anything about Libya besides the handful of people that work on it. So I've been working on a game that originally, it was about the post independence monarchy period, and it was originally kind of like a puzzle game, but now I'm going to redo it as a postcard coin game, with the monarchy and the regionalist and pan-Arabist movements. So who knows? It's a little convoluted. Maybe it might need a bigger game, but
Your rules section going to look more like mine?
Yeah.
No one knows about Libya, and I had flashbacks to when you, me, and Rachel were on that call, and I was like, yeah, fortunately no one knows anything about civilian evacuation. And Rachel's like, actually, I know quite a bit about it. And I was like, for the love of God, don't ask me questions. There's definitely going to be someone in the chat who's like, oh, what era of Libya?
I'm very excited to play your game, Walter. That's all I meant by it. And then ask you questions you probably don't know the answer to.
Well, Brett, are you going to enter a game? I mean, you've got a lot of experience. You've played a lot of games. I'm sure you've got a design in you somewhere, right?
I have a bunch of designs in me. They're just not postcard size. That's the challenge. It's so Mike Markowitz, professional game guy, but also a hobby game designer. And Compass has a couple of his old magazine games out that have been re-released as box sets. But I've known Mike for 15 years now or so, and great dude. And he always talks about the this cycle that wargamers are always stuck in, and it's the cycle of proliferation of complexity, followed by ruthless simplification, followed by a proliferation of complexity, followed by ruthless simplification. And I've joked with Mike over the years, because he's seen a couple of my designs, that I get stuck in the repetitive cycle of proliferation of complexity, proliferation of complexity, proliferation of complexity.
Okay.
And I never get around to the ruthless simplification part of things. So I've got a couple of things that I've kicked around for some small format stuff. And honestly, some of it was seeing some of the designs from last year's Postcard Jam and thinking, that'd be kind of cool to try and do something like that. It's just getting it down to simple enough that I could do that. I actually did, this was probably almost 10 years ago now, more of kind of a civ builder, realm builder kind of thing, because that's something that I enjoy a lot of. And it was a solo roll and write one of those. You play it on a single sheet of paper. The problem is the rules took up 3 sheets of paper. And so you could get a notepad of like the single game sheet that you need, but you still had 3 pages worth of rules. And I've done graphic design a lot over the years, taught at college level and everything. It's not that I joke with folks that I'm mechanically competent with the tools. I'm just not a very good creative about coming up with visually interesting ways to do stuff. I can tell you exactly how to do the great creative idea that you just drew on the whiteboard, but I suck at coming up with the good ideas on the whiteboard. But so I can make the stuff fit. Like I could shrink it down to fit on a postcard and nobody would be able to read it. But that's the biggest challenge I have, is I got a lot of ideas. I just don't know how to get it down to an actual postcard thing that makes sense. And that's the part that I struggle with. And there's a couple of ideas that I think I'd like to noodle with. And part of this goes back to, you sort of deal with what you know. And all 3 of you guys mentioned, hey, I happen to know something about this. And so that was something that was interesting to you. One of the things that drives me nuts about a lot of war games is the significant misuse and mismanagement of recon assets. And they either become overly powerful fire brigades running around on the map doing something they never would do in the real world, or they become, just sort of throwaway speed bumps here and there, because so much of their job is done as soon as you open the game box. Right. As soon as I open the box, the recon unit is irrelevant because I know the enemy's order of battle already. So I would like to figure out some way that you could do something with recon units to actually legitimately discover a little bit of what's out there, in such a way that feels more doctrinally accurate than just the crap that we end up doing with them in war games that's completely wrong.
Interesting.
Yeah.
So,
but again, it's sort of sticking to what and trying to isolate all the extra crap to just get down to that one kernel.
Yeah, I'm going to give you a suggestion. You go look at the 48 games that have been posted. Take a couple of those and just reskin it with your theme.
Yeah.
Use those mechanics, try to use those rules. And what will happen is you'll start off with a clone, and then fairly quickly it'll become original. You'll start changing this, changing that.
Yeah.
But if you start with a game that works and then just plug your idea on top of that and try to fit it into those mechanics, you'll be surprised that barrier will start to just dissipate.
Yeah. Well, that's one of the reasons why I was asking sort of what were some of the other things folks had looked at for inspiration. I've been a big role-playing gamer my whole life also. And honestly, because they take up less shelf space, probably own a lot more role-playing stuff than I do war game stuff. Because I can fit 14 RPG modules in the same space as one box war game on my shelves. But one of the things that I backed on Kickstarter probably about 1.5 2 years ago was a thing called the Tiny Tome. And I think they just recently did a Tiny Tome 2 on there, where these are all 1-page RPGs. There
Oh,
are
nice.
role-playing games that fit on a single front-back sheet of paper. And the European folks will chuckle at this. The Americans won't. And this was A5 sheets of paper. So this is like a half of an 8.5 by 11. Got to fit on front back of that. And so they got probably like 180, 200 entries of this, picked like the best 64 or so, and published those as a book. And so you've got like 64 RPGs in a single little paperback book, which was kind of cool. There were some neat ideas in there. There's not much in there that I think would work from a direct war game sort of port, similar to what you were talking about there, Michael. But stuff that might serve as appropriate inspiration. So,
Yeah, I mean, the point is you take something that's already at that format and just
start playing
reskin
with
it. I mean, you'll be surprised. You think, oh, no, I don't want to steal somebody's idea. Well, it's how we share thoughts and design process, right? And again, you'll make it your own very quickly because you're going to go, well, I would do this a little bit. I mean, this is me with every design. Unfortunately, I start to play a game and I'm like, okay, I'm going to have to house rule that because I think it should be done this way. Right.
That's how the entire Next War series from GMT came about, was Mitchell Land proposing to Gene some ideas and changes to the Korea 95 game. And Gene finally said, well, here, fine. Why don't you do it? Take all this stuff and you do it. And by the time Mitchell was done with modifying the different Korea stuff that he was interested in, you had Next War Korea. And then they just took that rule set and started iterating on it.
Yeah, people kind of forget that even Kriegspiel was derivative of this older game, Königspiel, which itself was derivative of chess. So there's truly nothing new under the sun. Yeah. All of us have been cribbing design elements from other games for forever, and it's really, like Mike says, you will make it your own very quickly if you're interested in design.
Speak for yourself, Walter. I'm entirely original.
That's true.
So for me, when kind of setting out to design my game, the research is always an issue. Like, how do we assign values to some of these hypothetical things? There's not a ton of case studies out there on FONOPS, and not a whole lot of that. I imagine for humanitarian evacuations of tiny islands, there's probably not a ton of case studies, nor for a future Taiwanese election or referendum. So I'm always curious, how did you all go about, researching and then assigning values to, probabilities and the various different actions within your game? Was a lot of that game driven, or you're based on your subject matter expertise, Walter?
Yeah, so a lot of this for me was necessity driven. I knew it had to involve D6s. D6 probabilities vary pretty wildly. As anyone who has played any amount of Warhammer will tell you, you will get absolutely shafted on a particular D6 roll that you needed to make. But yes, there are no real sources for evacuation of the first island chain. I mean, there's news articles that talk about it. So I had to pick some basic things that I knew to be true based off the scenarios that were being offered and based off the evidence there was. So there were a couple things like this. The first that I knew to be true was that this would be an incredibly complicated, multi-day and variable process. That's the first presumption. Not presumption, but thing that I could ascertain from the research. The second kind of immutable fact that I found was that there's a balancing between naval and airborne evacuation, whereas planes are faster, but obviously fit less people than boats, whereas boats are slower, but fit more people. And balancing that is an integral part of the game. And as far as the other principles of design, this was kind of where the game leaned into. Again, it was more of a sandbox, more of an abstracted kind of make your own game element to it. I really did half the job of designing a game for this game because I want people to kind of make new scenarios and make their own game with the variant rules that I provided. But yeah, I hope that answers the question at least.
It didn't.
Then you're out of luck.
I'm just kidding. Rachel?
It succeeded in Walter's goal of tap dancing around the question you asked him.
What was it? Did it? I'm sorry. I was trying to answer. I just get distracted.
It was fine. I was just giving you a hard time.
Also, just going off of what you just said, Walter, I think sometimes the games where you can add in your own homebrew rules and change it and modify it and make it better, or like your rules you can add in or take out, I think those are some of the most useful to learn by. Because it's like, okay, so I don't think you did half the design job. I think you did a better job than somebody just gave you a set of like ABC.
That's very nice of you to say.
You're welcome. In all honesty, for me, for the research element of it, I used what I knew. I've spent a very long time studying influence operations. And so I just took from most of my background knowledge, and then most of the dice roll game mechanic comparison of like, this is what a dice roll does, this is how the impacts need to be balanced, was 100% vibes, refined down through playtesting. It was, I like this number. Let's see if it works when we try it. And that was my super sophisticated way of avoiding having to do any math. But
I appreciate
it. On that, there are a lot of people that have done research on escalation dynamics. And while they're not in the FunOp world, you did play with that like escalation dynamic, essentially. How did you figure out how you were going to balance that out more so of like what caused escalation versus?
So, escalation, like it's very vague too. And then there's only so much that we know for certain about, Chinese reaction and Chinese opinion. A lot of it sounds, traditional, saber rattling, histrionics every time, the U.S. or an ally will do something like that, and mainly the U.S. So it's really hard to gauge how much of escalation it is. But, we do have a few case studies and went back and kind of compared the instances of behavior, aggressive maneuvering using water cannons, for example, such as happened, a month or two ago with the Philippines, and used those, set those as benchmarks, and then just kind of played around with that from there. So, that's always, for me, that's always hard just because, we're working with general concepts. We're not working with a historical case, really, or a well-documented single historical case. So you can't just be like, this doesn't produce the exact historical effect that I wanted it to. So, doing something general like this, I always have questions about what am I benchmarking at the right level?
Yeah, no, that's fair.
Well, isn't there the historical fact that we both still exist?
There is that.
Right.
So, but
Yeah,
who knows what might have gotten swept under the rug at some points.
Yeah. That's an interesting challenge. I've never designed a game with that limited or that kind of concept what you guys are exposed to, what you're trying to learn. So I find listening to where you guys are coming from very enlightening for me as a designer to go, yeah, these are ideas or approaches I didn't even think of.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I think ultimately, like, every action in a game needs some kind of adjudication of what was the outcome effect of all of this. And in order to assess who won or lost, or whether it was a tie, and to what degree, you need some way of comparing those attempted outcomes. And one of the great things about working, towards futuristic something or sci-fi or space something is you can make it all up. Nobody can argue with you. I mean, that's great. The problem is historically, what do you come up with? And the other challenge, and this is something that I've seen brought up elsewhere in some of the design discussions online, is the danger of taking the historical outcome as the most likely outcome. And because the historical outcome may have been the outlier. Battle of Cowpens is a great example from the American Revolution. That double envelopment with the militia in the middle should not have worked. The Battle of Cowpens is a great example of the American player, doing better than average on most of their die rolls in that battle. If you were actually designing to most probable historical outcome, the Americans likely get their ass kicked. But the danger you run into is that if you make the historical outcome the outlier, people complain about there being something wrong with your game. I think so long as the historical outcome is within the band of possibilities, then you're fine. I think if you end up designing something in which the historical outcome is a mathematical impossibility, you screwed up. That's an easy check.
Yeah.
But I think too many people looking at, the term you guys were using was benchmarking. It's a great term. Where do you set that benchmark? And particularly if you're looking for historical precedent, careful that the historical precedent wasn't assumed to be the mean. And that can be hard to do. And it can be hard to have to stand up and suffer the slings and arrows of pissed off grognards when you say, no, that wasn't the most, von Manstein's backhand blow in the East Front in World War II. Look, that was a double six, right? I mean, that was he pulled off the right maneuver and got the right die roll. It's just it's tough to want to make that argument and to have to continue to make that argument. So some people just shrug, go, all right, I'm not going to bother because I don't need the headache. So.
Well, I think that becomes more of an important topic on the larger the scale that your game is based off of. You can, I think, get away with a lot more variance with, say, a tactical level game because the outcome is just that one battle or that one taking that hill or that house. And so it doesn't have the same ramifications on a broader scale. And so I think you have some leeway as a designer to do a little bit more maybe with not having to be as accurate historically when you're doing something at a smaller tactical scale of maybe a squad of soldiers against, again, taking a house.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Well, that landed really well.
I feel like I've been talking, so
I have slightly split attention at the moment only because we're running into some slowdowns on the Discord server, and I'm trying to help guys troubleshoot that a little bit. To
the Discord,
you got a lot on your plate, dude.
Which is why I wanted you guys asking each other questions, which you've done, which is great. Like, not a lot of the panels we've had in the past have done that. I'm still a little irked that like our audience hasn't chimed in with more questions and are just like being nice to people.
Rachel, I have a question.
Oh no.
What kind of internal pressures do you feel because the election is going to happen?
Oh,
And
the
if
election
you're
happened.
Huh?
The election happened.
There you go. Then that's great. I know nothing about Taiwan's election. I was like, this is obviously
Didn't it just happen like 2 days ago?
It happened overnight. As of this morning, the DPP won the Taiwan election.
How poorly did you prognosticate?
Yeah. Let's use your predictive model here of this postcard game to.
No, it was not a vote for independence. That was a vote for president, which in theory means nothing.
Nice sidestep.
But no, I was thinking about that. It was just really kind of convenient, kind of terrible timing because originally the first version of this game was a vote for the 2024 Taiwan election. And then as I had to simplify it down and make it fun, I was like, this being based in current day and like an actual like prediction mechanism is pushing me to make it too real. I need to abstract it one step. And I was like, let's just go full referendum for independence.
Mm-hmm. There you go.
And push it farther out into the future. And I think that kind of goes off of Brand's point of like with the history models, you worry with like the benchmarking of like, oh, well, is reality going to like, is what happened in reality going to be the end result of this game? Whereas for me, if I'm going to write a game or a scenario, I want it to be in the future so that whatever outcome it is, someone can't fight it and be like, well, that didn't happen in real life, so your game's bad.
Look, you don't need to tell me about it. I did a Ukraine Civil War design back in 2007 with the Russians invading. And yeah, like 15 years later, obviously it's significantly overcome by events. Because like the Americans aren't distracted by being deployed to Iraq anymore. But yeah, it's, you go back and look at what was designed and a bunch of the assumptions that were made in 2007 and fewer than half of them are relevant anymore. But everybody goes, oh, you've got a modern day Ukraine game. Why don't you get that published? Well, because like I'd have to change 90% of it at this point. Yeah. We just treat it as a historical artifact in the mid 2000s and call it good, So, But yeah, I feel you. You know, at a certain point, those future predictions that you're looking at, the calendar catches up to you. And
Yeah.
now you got to figure out what's next.
So I have a question for the three of you guys. When it comes to, say, your next design, there's a kind of a common question that's asked of designers just in general: theme or mechanic? And it sounds like you guys didn't really have a choice on theme per se, or that was pretty heavy-handed in a certain direction. But without having that constraint on you, where do you think you would be? Would you be more theme-based, or are you going to go mechanic-based when you design your next design?
So for me, I'm theme all the way. Like I'm pretty omnivorous when it comes to mechanics. I've got certain things I do like, but you know, I'm willing to, you know, as long as it produces, you know, something that feels authentic and produces a good experience consistent with what you want out of a theme, like I'm okay with just about anything. So for me, history, the Middle East, stuff like that, those are my kind of natural research inclinations and my background. So, you know, that's where I'll always gravitate to, stuff like rebel governance, you know, but still finding a way to kind of game that out. But yeah.
I'm team theme as well, and as someone I guess who plays a lot of games in my free time, the mechanics start to blur together a little bit to me, and there are obviously standout ones, but I've never thought up a mechanic and been like, I want to design a game around that. By contrast, I've thought up several like historical situations where I'm like, a game about this would be interesting, and you find the mechanics that fit that, that fit the story of the game and kind of the narrative of it. But yeah, that's my answer at least.
Okay.
Interesting. I am very much whatever comes to me creatively is how I will base the game, in terms of like, if I come up with a theme of like, I wanted to make this influence game, and so I figured out mechanics to fit into it, but also like sitting at the dinner table, I thought of, I want to figure out how to use a deck of cards and play it like a game of memory, and then had to think of a scenario to fit into that, and ended up with mining and minesweeping. And how do you actually make that work? And can you do it if it looks like a kid's game of memory and flipping cards and stuff like that? So I've done it both ways. I'm not going to try to control my creativity. I'm still a new designer. I'll figure out my path eventually.
Very neutral answer, but I get it. No, there's no right answer to it. I mean, it's creative. What we do is creative, right? So there's no, hey, this is the way it has to be done. I will kind of throw out a little challenge, because this is, I've got a couple of mechanics that I cannot come up with a game to fit around. And I'll just give you the synopsis, and you guys can ponder it and maybe come up and crack this. I have a basic mechanic I'm calling frenemy, and it works with at least 3 players or more. And basically, the player on your left, you try to help. The player on your right, you try to work against. So the person that's trying to help me, I'm working against. And it goes around the table in a circle. So everybody to the left, each player's trying to help. But in reverse, they're trying to not have you be successful. So it's frenemy, right? And I haven't come up with the theme to make that work, but it's just this interesting mechanic that to me is a puzzle that I want to crack. And I'm more team theme. Most of my stuff is theme based, but every now and then I'll get a mechanic and go, ooh, I want to see if I can make that work or make that fun.
I'm busy looking through RPG Geek to find it right now, but the guy that designed Apocalypse World designed a pirate themed game with a very similar mechanic to that, where there's somebody around the table that you're trying to help and somebody around the table that you're trying to screw with.
Well, and this is very specific in that the person that's trying to help me is the person I'm trying to hurt.
Yeah.
It seems like it could do well as, like, if it's strictly mapped to terrain, I think that's actually bad for this sort of game because it doesn't logistic. But if you were to model it about something like courtly intrigue or something like that, you could have a better time of it. I think that's my immediate thought, is that if you map this to islands, it's like everyone would just, like, this clockwise like formation of people attacking each other isn't like a sustainable, or like believable thing. But if it were an intrigue-based game where the resources are more abstracted and kind of like influence, let's say, that could be very interesting.
And I know we're off the topic of small-sided games, but I wanted to just kind of throw that out there and see if I can plant seeds in people's brains infect them with this.
I think Brian Crane probably, if he's listening to this after the fact, just had like 3 light bulbs go off, because Brian is always very good about mapping things not as physical terrain, but as sort of social terrain. And I think not so much as like direct political actors, but the electorates choosing those political actors. I think you've definitely got something in there, in that, these people might be trying to help get this thing this person elected, or this thing advanced on your behalf, but in the meantime, you're trying to hold them back from getting the other thing that they want done.
Yeah.
So that you get all the stuff you want and screw everybody else. That
more sort of a policy game is what you're proposing.
Yeah, exactly. Something in a very political policy sort of format there.
Yeah, I'm kind of stuck in the Roman Senate with where I might place this right now, but I'm not sure.
Roman Senate seems like thematically a good place for this. Just going with my gut here, I think you're on a good track already.
Well, we'll see. This has been in my head for 5 years, and I can't seem to get it past I can't even get it to a playtest stage, because it's still like, I'm not sure what's the object. How do you win? I mean, just some of the simple questions I don't have answers for at this point. So that's why I'm kind of infecting your brains with it. So maybe you won't sleep and you can.
An economic scenario might be helpful, because it's abstract enough that it wouldn't need like a map or a true resource. You would help and hurt people in that same way. Those are my 2 cents.
I see it as a card game too, potentially.
Yeah, you could look at trade agreements, Rachel. I think that's a good idea.
Yeah.
Everyone is trying to get the better end of a trade agreement, even if they're cooperating with the person they're making the agreement with.
Oh yeah, go ahead.
Go on, Nick. That was my only thought.
The one that I was thinking of, is something imperial, like with the colonialism, like could have the imperial power, or the comprador class, and the kind of the proletariat of whatever country, you can keep it generalized. That's kind of a tripolar kind of balance there. And oftentimes you've got situations where the empire wants to prop up the comprador class, but the comprador class, they don't really care. So that's just coming to me from I'm thinking like the British in Iraq. That's what I was thinking. Although I do agree generally with what Rachel and Walter said. You probably don't want to map this onto specific terrain.
No.
Yeah.
Well,
that might be something that you just invent a scenario to put it on, so that and you can grab a real world something and then just, like you said, reskin it to something fake. And come up with something completely different there.
I also think the more actors you have in this game, the less believable or sustainable this system might be. I strongly think that you should keep it to, it sounds intriguing with 3 and maybe with 4, but once you expand it to like, it's a 6-player game, it's like, this is just kind of everyone undermining everyone. Whereas like you had situations in like the Roman triumvirate, where there were people doing this exact political arrangement, so you could base it off. I think a small player count might be better. Rachel, you look like you just had an idea.
I did.
See, folks, we're designing games in real time here.
Guys, this is unparalleled content. This is why you pay $70 a month for the Armchair Dragoons Patreon.
Dude, if anybody was paying $70 a month, I'd be over the moon. But no, it's not happening.
Just scenario wise, there used to be a I can't remember what it's called, but it was a 3-person tournament in like some Viking something. And that's how they ran things. And it was very political agreements, but there were 3 people in charge. I'm pretty sure it was the Vikings. I don't remember. But that's the only part of the idea I had.
Hey, sometimes it just takes a little seed and then it grows and grows.
At that point, we are now looking into whose Google foo is stronger to come up with the right answer there.
Yes.
All right. Good thing you guys copyrighted. I'm taking it and running with it.
There you go. And I'll save my other unsolved mechanic for later, but I call it the lion and the lamb. And eventually I'll get a game out of that.
Very tantalizing, and yet you're not going to tell us.
Okay.
You're not going to tell the stream.
No. Okay. I guess we still got 15 minutes.
Yeah,
so
do it for the content.
Yeah. So the concept here is it's a bit of a party game. Ideally, it would be political, I think, and it's whether the group wins with one individual loser, or there's one individual winner and the group loses. And that is where, so the lion would be, I won and everybody else is lost. Or the lamb is, we all win and we've sacrificed one player for the group to win. And
is this, so are the lion and lamb roles, are they allocated ahead of time? Can they change throughout the game?
They're dynamic in that the concept is that you go through and you have to, there's probably going to be some victory point total that you have to maintain as a group. And depending on situations that come up in the game, somebody can go, well, I'm in the pack. Do I want to risk going to be the lion and go for the win? And if you go for the win and the lamb, or the sacrificial lamb, if you don't get your victory condition, is you are the one player with the highest victory points, but you did not get enough victory points to be the lion. So you've made a push to be the grand winner, and you've fallen short, and the group has sacrificed you because of your ambition.
There's
something
crab's
kind
trying
of
to get out of the pot.
Yeah, well, and now if you can get enough victory points to then dominate, you become the lion, and everybody else below you is lost because you have now gone through that resistance level to get to whatever that victory point is. And so there's this, who do you push forward to sacrifice? And if you're pushed in that position, do you try to back off and go back into the pack where you're safe? Or do you say, oh, I've been exposed, I'm now going to go for the win and really push to become the lion?
This reminds me a lot of Munchkin. If you've played Munchkin, where you have the pack of people
That's
that
a
are
good point.
ostensibly all working to beat down the head person, and eventually one of them shoots his shot and gets toward the top. It doesn't work exactly like that. I hate to do the big brain international relations move of being like, this sounds like the prisoner's dilemma, because it's not. The information's public and there's a whole host of other differences, but it's an interesting idea. I don't know. It doesn't jump to mind immediately what setting or what theme you could run with this.
Yeah. Again, these are my two mechanics that I can't come up with a theme, or even when I get a theme to say, hey, there's that, I can plug that mechanic in.
So one of the games that came to mind was, it kind of works like the shares mechanic in John Company, where you get a lot of shares. Those are worth victory points at the end of the game. But if you fall short and people start to kind of back out of the company or deliberately tank it as a way of undermining you, you're left with a bunch of crap shares and lose victory points. So going ahead and kind of trying to be the lion, so to speak, getting a lot of shares, and then defaulting more or less on those shares and those being worthless. So that's something that reminded me of in that sense.
Yeah, but see, there's always going to be one player that has the most victory points, even if they didn't mean to, and will get sacrificed.
You could do sort of a multiple generals fighting from the same side, and they have an individual glory score. And it could be like, oh, my general actually sees a chance to win this really big battle, and he's going to do that because it's going to make him glorious, even if it means our side is in a worse position and we end up losing the wider engagement or the war even. But
okay, I can see that.
Yeah.
So kind of so if you become the lamb, you in some regards will become kind of the puppet that the group controls. You don't actually have power. Anyway, so those are the two design things. Also, I'll throw one last thing out, is I've always wanted to design a game that is on a T-shirt. so that if you're at a con and you walk by and I've got a certain T-shirt and you got a T-shirt, that we might throw down.
That's
that is creative.
That would be really interesting if you could make it, like Thursday is Throwdown T-shirt day. So.
Yeah.
Now that I'm thinking about having flat bill hats with games boards on them.
Yeah.
Well, it goes back to. Have you ever heard of the game Button Men? And you'd have a button that had certain dice, and you might be a dragon, and somebody else was something else, and you'd use your dice, and there was a whole thing of mechanics, and you'd walk around a convention wearing whatever button you were, and there were multiple characters. They did it for L5R, Legend of Five Rings. And so that's kind of where it came from. And I thought, what if I didn't? That's totally impractical.
Crab plan for life, by the way, to anyone watching.
Okay.
Plan. Let's continue.
Crane Clan.
This is your hourly crab post for above our heads.
One of the guy, I think it was Jeff Tidball, ended up doing the design that he wanted something that you could do while standing in line at conventions. I honestly think he was inspired by the 2014, 2015 Origins registration meltdown, where all the computers for Patch Tuesday decided to update the night before registration, which meant so Walter, you've been in the Columbus Convention Center, you've seen
it's horrifying.
So the Origins registration desk wasn't always at that north that north lobby where you went through it. It used to be down by the escalators at the other end of the exhibit halls. And the line stretched from there all the way to that north door and back before they ever got the first people checked in.
That's crazy.
So the idea was we need something we can play while we're standing here in line, because it's not like you can lay out a map and move it around with you or anything. And so he came up with this idea of some coins in your hand that not just which side of the coin was up or not, but sort of where in your hand you were holding it. Which fingers were you holding it between? What was up? What was down? Was it in your fist? Just different things like that to sort of rock, paper, scissors, but with a lot more variation, because the coin would now matter also. And it didn't ever really say it was one of those things that sort of it overcomplicated rock, paper, scissors, but it was trying to come up with some sort of different gimmick that, based on the environment in which you were playing it, you had to change what it was you were trying to do. So
interesting.
It was an idea.
Because everyone's watching this for 2 hours, I know you guys have time on your hands, so I will self-promote by asking Brant to put my Origins article in the chat.
I'll throw it in the chat.
All the minutiae of Columbus Convention Center you could ever possibly want.
I'll definitely give that a read.
I will throw it in the chat for this in the in the Discord so folks can find it. Guys, we're kind of up at time. Honestly, I wasn't expecting us to stretch this into the full 2 hours, so I don't mind that we did. But I was fully prepared for a natural conclusion of the conversation around 90 minutes, and you guys have made it run without a whole lot of input from the audience, which you guys are letting us down here. But yeah, this has been really cool, and certainly a lot of ideas for things that you can do with kind of getting off your butt and doing some game design, but some ideas for ways in which you can do it in a really small format, and a lot of different small format ones to go check out and discuss and think about and be a part of. So don't let that be a distractor or a barrier to you getting involved in kicking around some design ideas.
Exactly.
Because again, as Michael noted, like there were some well-known designers in there, and that's cool. Like it's nice to have Mark Walker and David Thompson and those guys in there. But there were some folks that that was the first thing they'd ever done, and you know what? They're all on even footing in this in this game jam. I didn't say the C word. So don't be afraid to participate. And guys, I've already been harassing Sebastian in the Goose Discord about, hey, why don't you submit these small format games over to the game jam so you guys can go bug your peers to do the same.
Yeah. In fact, I expect to see all 3 of your games posted in the next week. Just saying.
Oh my God.
All right.
We'll see.
Assuming they meet
Wrong answer. Wrong answer, Rachel.
Nice. Make them sweat for it, Rachel. That's what I got to say.
Yeah. So around the room here, Nick and Walter and Rachel and Michael, thank you guys very much for being here and being a part of this panel. I hope you get a chance to pop into a couple other games over the convention weekend and, at least watch some stuff, if not playing some stuff. For the audience, you got about an hour break till we're back on the air. We've got the keynote coming up at 5. We're being followed after that by Volko. Grant is going to be interviewing Volko about his brand new design, not a Levian campaign or coin game. This is a new thing set in World War II. And then at the end of the night, we got the Starfleet Tactical guys that are doing a special show just for the ACDC. That's going to be talking a variety of sci-fi combat stuff. Those guys do a normal weekly show on Saturday nights, but they're changing their timing and their content just this particular week for us, which is kind of cool of them to do. So we'll have them on at 9 tonight, and all those times are Eastern, adjust as needed for your local time zone.
Awesome.
But cool. Guys, appreciate it a lot. Thank you. And audience, thank you for sticking with us through these 2 hours of kind of rambling about, and we hope you had a good time. Those of you watching this 2.5 years after the fact on YouTube, look, you just missed the Discord link. Sorry. The server got shut down a while ago. So, cool. Thanks, everybody, and we'll catch y'all later.
Bye, y'all.
Thank you. Come on, you Spurs.